The courtroom in Columbus was packed so tight that every breath felt shared. Cameras flashed from the gallery, reporters craned over each other, and the tension in the air tightened around Rain Boudreau like a rope. She stood before the bench, her hands trembling, but her chin stayed lifted as if she refused to let the moment break her. For months she had been painted as an unstable mother, a reckless woman who harmed her own child, lies crafted by the man who once vowed to protect her. Now the truth played on the courtroom screens in front of the entire state. There, in crisp clarity, was Maxwell Harrington, her husband, gripping little Mason's wrist too hard at the daycare playground. The footage froze the room. You could hear gasps from every corner. Even the court stenographer paused. This was the evidence everyone said didn't exist. This was the moment that exposed everything. Maxwell's face drained of the confidence he always wore like a suit. His jaw clenched. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. He looked at the screen, then at Rain, then toward the door as if calculating a way out. But there wasn't one. Outside the courtroom doors, reporters shouted questions that slipped through. The cracks of the hallway. Is it true the CEO misled investigators? Did he falsify statements about his wife? Is the board involved? It was chaos. Pure, unfiltered chaos. Headlines pinged on every phone in the gallery. Billionaire CEO under investigation. Custody case turns against tech titan. The judge, an older man with calm eyes and a voice that carried authority without force, slowly removed his glasses. His gaze settled on Rain. For a split second she felt 6 months of fear, humiliation, loneliness, and confusion sitting heavy on her chest. Then his words rose above the noise, steady and absolute. "Mrs. Harrington, you are cleared of all charges." A collective murmur swept across the courtroom. Rain's knees weakened. The world blurred. Her breath caught in her throat. She collapsed into Tanika's arms, not from defeat, but from sheer release. Tanika held her steady as Rain sobbed into her shoulder. Across the aisle, Maxwell stood frozen as the reality sank in. Every lie he crafted was falling apart in public. Every step he took to ruin Rain was now turning back toward him. His empire, built on pride, secrecy, and control, was crumbling right in front of him. The judge called for order, but the moment had already carved itself into history. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, believing they were the safest person in your life, only to discover they were quietly building your destruction behind your back? Have you ever loved someone who turned your kindness into a weakness they could use? Have you ever been blamed for something you did not do, and no one seemed to listen when you tried to defend yourself? These are the moments that test a person's heart. These are the betrayals that change lives forever. Rain Boudreau wasn't just betrayed, she was targeted. Her billionaire husband framed her to protect his relationship with Zara Montgomery. He tried to take her son away. He used influence, lawyers, money, and manipulation to bury her voice. And for a moment, he almost succeeded. Rain, sitting on a cold jail bench, holding Mason's tiny stuffed giraffe to her chest, whispered into the dark, "Maxwell did this." That sentence became her turning point. The moment she stopped collapsing and started fighting. But when Rain walked out free, the world learned one truth. No empire built on lies can survive a woman who rises. Stay with this story until the end, because what happens to Maxwell will shock you. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your engagement helps YouTube show this story to even more amazing people who enjoy powerful, meaningful storytelling. Welcome to Mr. Graham's Stories, where we share impactful life lessons through memorable stories. If you're new, we're glad you're here. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and join us for more inspiring stories. The morning sunlight poured gently through the tall windows of the Harrington home, casting a warm glow across the kitchen as Rain Boudreau placed a plate of fresh waffles in front of Mason. Their son grinned wide, swinging his legs beneath the island stool, while pretending his fork was a spaceship, challenging the syrup bottle to a duel. "Mommy, look, Captain Syrup is under attack," Mason announced, launching an imaginary blast at his breakfast. Rain laughed, smoothing a hand over his curls. "Captain Syrup better retreat before he loses the battle," she teased. Mason erupted into giggles, nearly toppling his juice cup. Maxwell Harrington entered the kitchen moments later, rolling his sleeves to his elbows in a way that made him look more like a playful husband and the hard-edged CEO everyone knew downtown. He tapped the bowl of scrambled eggs with his spoon, pretending to inspect it like a scientist. Mason, who approved this breakfast. "These eggs look suspiciously fluffy," he said, pretending to narrow his eyes. "Daddy, they're perfect." Mason insisted, reaching to steal some from the pan. Maxwell bent down, kissed the top of Rain's head, and whispered, "Good morning, superstar." His affection felt natural, familiar, the kind of small tenderness that once made Rain believe they were unshakable. She smiled back, warming under the gentle touch. For a moment, everything felt untouched by the storms waiting outside these walls. As they settled at the table, Mason abruptly lifted a bright red superhero cape he had hidden under his pajamas. "Ta-da! I'm wearing it to breakfast." Maxwell gasped dramatically. "A superhero dining with us mere mortals? What an honor." Rain shook her head with amusement. "Only if our guest behaves. Heroes still have to finish their waffles." Mason nodded seriously, saluting them both before diving into his plate. There was laughter. There was warmth, the kind that made the house feel alive. A buzz from Maxwell's phone broke the rhythm. The message preview flashed across the screen for half a second, too quick for Rain to fully see, but she caught the tense flick in Maxwell's eyes. Something unreadable. He slipped the phone into his pocket. "I have a meeting downtown," he said lightly. "One of those last-minute investor things." Rain tilted her head. "On a Saturday?" "Yeah, you know how it is. They pretend to value my weekends," Maxwell joked, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Rain sensed the off note, but chose not to press. Today was supposed to be easy, peaceful, a day filled with friends and laughter. As Maxwell finished his coffee, he brushed a thumb against Rain's cheek. "I'll be home early for our date night. Don't have too much fun without me, Mrs. Harrington." She nudged him playfully. "Only if you promise to actually show up on time." Maxwell chuckled, kissed her temple, and headed toward the door. Mason chased him halfway through the living room to give him a final superhero hug before he left. "I'll miss you, Daddy," Mason yelled. "I'll miss you more," Maxwell replied, pulling him into a tight squeeze. The front door shut behind him, leaving the house with a soft stillness. Rain turned back toward the kitchen, tidying the plates as Mason danced around with his cape floating behind him. These were the mornings she fought hard to build. Stability, love, routine. The kind of life she wished she had grown up with. Her boutique was thriving. Her family was growing. Her marriage, at least on most days, felt true. She took comfort in believing that Maxwell still valued the home they created. Yet that faint flicker in his eyes gnawed at her, the way he avoided the message notification, the stiffness in his breath. Something tugged at her instincts, but she pushed it away. She always pushed it away. "Mommy, when is Auntie Tanika coming?" Mason asked, pulling her from her thoughts. "She'll be here soon," Rain said, checking the time. "Why? You planning to show her your superhero moves?" Mason nodded vigorously. "She said she'd help me practice my flying punches." Rain laughed again. "I'm not sure the living room is ready for that." Minutes later, the doorbell rang. Mason sprinted to greet Tanika, shouting her name like he hadn't seen her in years. Tanika stepped inside, full of energy as always, wearing her favorite sunflower earrings and carrying a bag of pastries. "Good morning, Harringtons. I brought sugar and chaos." Rain hugged her tightly. "Perfect. We needed both." They moved into the sun-filled living room, where Tanika set down the pastries and immediately joined Mason in his superhero routine. She mimicked dramatic battle cries, while Mason leaped from the sofa to the carpet with exaggerated grace. Rain watched the scene, laughing. Her heart felt full, yet a shadow of worry tugged at the back of her mind. Tanika eventually plopped onto the couch, catching her breath. "Girl, I needed this break. My students were wild yesterday. One of them tried to convince me he invented math." Rain burst into laughter. "Maybe he'll become your boss someday." "Lord forbid," Tanika exclaimed dramatically. "I can barely keep up with their homework excuses." The two women chatted about life, work, Mason's latest obsession with superhero cartoons, and Rain's newest boutique designs. It all flowed easily, like it always did. But when the conversation shifted to Maxwell, Tanika raised an eyebrow. "He left early again? Everything okay?" Rain hesitated for a moment, but didn't want to ruin the morning with her unease. "He said it's an investor meeting." Tanika watched her closely. "As long as you feel good about it." Rain nodded, even though she didn't feel as certain as she once did. "We're fine," she insisted gently. "Just busy." Tanika didn't push. She simply placed a hand on Rain's arm and squeezed. "I'm here if anything changes." Rain smiled gratefully, but her mind drifted back to Maxwell's half-hidden expression. Something was shifting. She just didn't know what. Not yet. That afternoon, once Tanika left with promises to return for dinner, Rain decided to take Mason for a quick stroll around their neighborhood. It was warm, with a light breeze moving through. The trees, the kind of day that invited memories to resurface without warning. Maxwell's absence made her mind wander in ways she usually kept tucked away. Mason skipped beside her, cape fluttering behind him as if he were leading a parade. "Mommy, you think Daddy will like my new superhero jump?" he asked, trying to leap over a small crack in the sidewalk. "I think he'll be amazed," Rain replied, giving him an encouraging smile. As they walked, her thoughts drifted backward, to the first time she met Maxwell Harrington. It was years earlier, in Cleveland, at a charity gala hosted inside the marble atrium of an old museum. Rain had been invited as the guest designer for a new local fashion initiative. She remembered stepping inside the venue wearing a simple but striking dress she had created herself. Maxwell was there as a guest speaker for a tech outreach program. Their worlds should have remained separate that night. Tech and fashion rarely crossed paths, yet fate had a habit of nudging them into the same spaces. Rain had been admiring a painting when she heard a soft, hesitant voice beside her. "I'm trying to figure out if I'm supposed to be impressed, or just act like it." She looked up to find Maxwell standing there, hands tucked awkwardly in his pockets. He wasn't the polished billionaire she expected. He was nervous, almost boyish behind his confident facade. She laughed, not because the joke was clever, but because of how genuinely he delivered it. "You don't have to pretend," she replied. "Half the people here are just nodding because they feel they're supposed to." His shoulders relaxed. "Thank God. I thought I was the only one faking my understanding of abstract art." Rain remembered how electrifying the moment felt. Two strangers sharing a quiet corner in a crowded room, seeing each other clearly for the first time. After the gala, they ended up at a late-night diner nearby, still dressed in their event clothes, sharing a plate of fries because the kitchen was about to close. The simplicity of that moment stayed with her for years. Maxwell wasn't the billionaire CEO then. He was just a man with a crooked smile who wanted to know everything about her childhood, her designs, her dreams. Dates followed, some elegant, others delightfully clumsy. One night they went to a jazz club, where Maxwell tried to dance even though he had absolutely no rhythm. Rain remembered how she doubled over laughing as he attempted to follow the beat, stepping on her toes with every other move. "I swear I'm better at coding than dancing," he grumbled. "Good," she teased, "because you're terrible at dancing." Another memory surfaced, a weekend trip to Amish country. Maxwell was fascinated with how peaceful everything felt. Rain spent most of the day teaching him how to take candid photos for her boutique's marketing ideas. At one point, he snapped a picture of her laughing under a willow tree, and she joked that he finally learned how to use the camera. "Photographer of the year," he announced proudly. They bonded over food, too. Rain remembered introducing him to her grandmother's peach cobbler recipe. He ate it with such seriousness, eyes closed, savoring every bite, that she found herself falling harder for him. Maxwell introduced her to his world as well. He took her to his family's farm outside Cincinnati, where mornings were quiet and full of fog that lifted slowly across the fields. His brother taught Rain how to shoot hoops, and she surprised all of them by sinking 3 shots in a row. Maxwell's cousins cheered, and Maxwell stood behind her with a sheepish grin. "I think they like you more than they like me," he said. "Of course they do," she joked. "I'm more fun." Those memories carried so much warmth. Family cookouts, gospel choir performances where Maxwell clapped off beat, Sunday mornings on the farm, late-night talks on Rain's apartment balcony. She had believed their relationship was something rare, a bridge between two different worlds, held together by respect and an eagerness to learn from one another. As she pushed Mason gently on a swing at the neighborhood playground, she thought back to the night Maxwell proposed. It wasn't a grand public moment. No flash mobs, no fireworks, no crowd. It happened in her small apartment kitchen while she was cooking dinner. Maxwell had walked in holding a ring box and said quietly, "I can build companies, but I don't want to build a life without you in it." It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and it moved her so deeply that she said yes before he even finished the sentence. Everything after that felt like an unexpected dream. The wedding, buying their home, preparing Mason's nursery, Maxwell beaming the day their son was born. For years, Rain carried that memory as a reminder of who Maxwell was at his core. But as she watched Mason laugh on the swing, her chest tightened. When exactly had things changed? When did that sincere man transform into someone who hid his phone, worked more hours than he was home, and brushed off every concern with a quick explanation? Rain breathed deeply and reminded herself that every marriage goes through difficult seasons. Maybe Maxwell was carrying something he hadn't learned to express. Maybe the stress was suffocating him. Maybe she was overthinking again. Mason jumped off the swing and ran toward her with his cape flowing. "Mommy, did you see how high I went?" "I saw, baby." "You're getting stronger every day," she said, scooping him into her arms. As they walked home, the breeze shifted, bringing a strange heaviness that Rain couldn't explain. The day had been lovely. Mason was happy. Tanika was supportive. Everything on the surface appeared normal. Yet in the quiet spaces of her mind, an ache whispered a warning. Something wasn't the same. Something was slipping, little by little. And even though she couldn't see it clearly, her heart felt the distance before her eyes ever would. Ohio had a rhythm all its own, one that settled gently around Rain and her family. It wasn't flashy or chaotic. Instead, it gave structure to her days, mornings filled with routine, afternoons spent designing new pieces for her boutique, and evenings where Mason's laughter spilled through the hallways like a familiar song. On weekday mornings, Rain often walked Mason to school. Their neighborhood was peaceful, lined with sturdy homes, towering oaks, and neighbors who waved as they passed. Mason knew almost everyone on their street. Older couples adored him. Younger families invited him to playdates. Even the mailman greeted him like an old friend. Rain loved those walks. She saw her life reflected in every small exchange, the warm greetings, the ease of interaction, the smiles that crossed racial and cultural lines without hesitation. Ohio was not perfect, but here, in their pocket of Columbus, she felt embraced. Maxwell joined them when he could, rare on weekdays but more frequent on weekends. He'd walk with one hand holding Mason's backpack, and the other intertwined with Rain's. On those mornings, other parents sometimes whispered, not maliciously, but with quiet curiosity. An African-American designer married to a tech mogul wasn't something they saw every day. Most smiled warmly. Some asked polite questions. A few simply stared, unsure how to place them in a world where people still fit others into comfortable boxes. Yet none of it bothered Rain. She held Maxwell's hand proudly, and he held hers tightly in return. One Saturday morning, the three of them stopped at a neighborhood cafe. Mason insisted on wearing his superhero cape, and the barista played along, calling him the Guardian of Columbus. Maxwell ordered Rain's favorite latte before she even stepped in line. "How do you always remember?" Rain teased. Maxwell shrugged playfully. "Easy. You're unforgettable." Their differences were always present, but not in a way that separated them. Instead, they blended, like the two cultures they came from. Her Gullah roots full of tradition, rhythm, and vibrant storytelling, his Midwestern upbringing rooted in quiet strength and practicality. Their home reflected that balance. Art from Rain's heritage hung on the walls beside black and white photographs from Maxwell's family farm. Mason's room combined it all: posters of space heroes, hand-woven quilts from Rain's relatives, and wooden toys Maxwell's brother sent during holidays. Sunday afternoons often became a melting pot of both worlds. Rain's family would stop by, Auntie Phyllis always first through the door, carrying dishes that filled the house with familiar scents. Maxwell helped set the table while Mason danced through the living room. One weekend, Auntie Phyllis brought a pot of red rice that had everyone hovering over the stove. "You're going to spoil us," Maxwell joked as he tried to sneak a spoonful. Auntie Phyllis slapped his hand away playfully. "Not until everyone's seated. Even billionaires can wait their turn." Rain laughed at the mock scolding, and Maxwell accepted it with a sheepish grin. There were moments when cultural differences surfaced naturally, like when Rain's cousins spoke rapid-fire Gullah expressions during storytelling sessions, leaving Maxwell blinking in confusion, or when Maxwell insisted on bringing his family's traditional pies to cookouts, prompting Rain's uncles to debate which region prepared them better. But those moments brought them closer. Each difference became part of the fabric of their marriage, something to laugh about, learn from, and cherish. Rain's boutique was gaining traction around this time. Orders increased, fashion bloggers were beginning to notice her designs, and local stores had begun showcasing her pieces. She worked late into the night sometimes, sketching new styles at the dining table. Maxwell often joined her, reviewing spreadsheets while she drew. One evening, she looked up to find him analyzing her marketing numbers with intense focus. "You don't have to do that," Rain said softly. "I want to," Maxwell replied. "Your work is brilliant. You just need the right exposure." He showed her new ways to organize customer feedback, helped her streamline online orders, and even reached out to a business contact who agreed to feature her designs at a conference. "You're building something incredible," he told her. "You deserve help, and you deserve recognition." Rain's heart warmed at how invested he seemed. It felt good, deeply good, to have her husband believe in her dream. His support came naturally back then, without hesitation or resentment. There was no competition, no bruised ego, no hidden agenda, just love, just partnership. On one memorable afternoon, Maxwell surprised her by bringing home a mannequin for her workspace. "You said you needed one to visualize your dresses better," he said, carrying it in with exaggerated effort. "I may not know fashion, but I know tools." Rain hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. For a long time, those moments carried her. They explained why she kept fighting for the stability of their marriage later on. Before the shadows crept in, before lies seeped through the cracks, before distance settled between them, there was a foundation built on sincerity. As she tucked Mason into bed one night, she glanced toward the living room where Maxwell sat working. His soft humming drifted down the hallway, off-key, as always, and Rain smiled at the sound. That was their life then, imperfect, blended, but whole. And for a while, nothing felt strong enough to shake it. Rain always made sure that Mason grew up grounded in both the worlds that shaped him. Her Gullah roots were a living part of her identity, not only in stories passed down, but in the rhythms, flavors, and wisdom that flowed naturally through her daily life. She wanted Mason to feel that same connection, to know where he came from, and to take pride in it. One summer weekend, Rain decided to take Mason on a cultural day, something she often did when she wanted to center herself. She set up a small table in the backyard, filled with ingredients she learned to use from her grandmother. Mason sat on a stool, watching with wide eyes as she worked through each step. "Mommy, what's this one called again?" he asked, pointing at a small bowl of spices. "That's a special blend my grandmother taught me. It goes into dishes that take time and patience. Like me," he joked, grinning. Rain laughed. "Exactly like you." She explained pieces of the Gullah language she remembered from her childhood, teaching Mason simple words and their meanings. He repeated them with enthusiasm, sometimes stumbling, sometimes saying them so adorably wrong that Rain had to pause to laugh. A warm breeze moved through the yard as Rain stirred a pot, letting Mason sprinkle in the spices. He looked up with a proud smile. "I'm helping like Daddy helps you with your dresses." "You sure are," she said, touching his cheek. "You're part of both of us." Later that week, Rain invited Maxwell to join her at a community church gathering, something she attended consistently, even after marriage. Maxwell wasn't raised in a religious household, but he respected the comfort and joy it brought her. The choir was practicing that evening, and Rain wanted him and Mason to experience it together. The church was alive when they entered, voices merging with the deep sound of the piano, feet tapping lightly against the wooden floors. Rain greeted familiar faces, while Mason held Maxwell's hand, staring in awe at the colorful choir robes. When the choir began a new song, the room filled with harmonies so powerful that even Maxwell straightened up. Rain watched him, noticing the way he leaned forward, almost drawn in by the waves of sound. She nudged him gently. "Beautiful, right?" she whispered. He nodded. "I didn't expect it to hit like this." Mason swayed excitedly, imitating the choir's movements. Rain scooped him into her arms so he could see better. The choir director noticed them and gave Rain a warm wave before continuing. Every note, every clap, every joyful burst of sound wrapped around them like a shared heartbeat. Rain felt her worlds merge, her family standing beside her, connected through something that was deeply hers. When the practice ended, a few choir members came over to greet Maxwell. One of them nudged him lightly. "We heard about your company's expansion. Blessings to you, brother." Maxwell nodded, visibly humbled. "Thank you." "I'm honored to be here." Rain squeezed his hand. Maxwell wasn't perfect, but in these moments he tried, and that meant something. Sunday cookouts were another place where worlds blended easily. Rain's family gatherings were full of noise, laughter, and cousins who argued lovingly over who made the best seasoning mix. The food was always abundant: bowls of red rice, crab stew, grilled corn, and desserts that vanished within minutes. Maxwell never missed a chance to attend. Even when he didn't understand all the jokes or the teasing thrown his way, he was present, carrying plates, handing out drinks, and getting roped into games he wasn't prepared for. One afternoon, the family organized a 3-legged race. Rain refused to participate because she claimed her dress was too expensive to risk grass stains. Maxwell stepped up instead, paired with one of Rain's energetic cousins. The countdown started. 3, 2, 1. They launched forward, legs tied together, wobbling uncontrollably. Maxwell's competitive streak kicked in, but his coordination didn't. Within seconds he toppled sideways, dragging Rain's cousin down with him as everyone burst into laughter. Rain bent over laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Maxwell lay on his back, breathless from laughing too. "That was not my fault," he insisted. "Your cousin has terrible balance. Boy, you better stop before I challenge you again." Her cousin yelled. Even Mason couldn't stop laughing. Daddy felt like a superhero who forgot to fly. Maxwell scooped Mason up and spun him around. Superheroes don't always get it right the first time. Moments like this gave Mason a sense of belonging in both families. He had Maxwell's calm curiosity and Rain's expressive spark. At cookouts, he chased his cousins across the yard. On trips to Maxwell's family farm, he roamed fields and learned to skip stones. One day after a cookout, Mason sat between Rain and Maxwell, licking melted ice cream from his fingers. "Mommy, am I part Gullah like you?" "Yes, baby," Rain said. "It's a part of your story." "And part of Daddy, too?" Maxwell smiled. "You're the best of both of us." Mason grinned wide. "That makes me special." Rain kissed his forehead. "More special than you know." That evening, as they drove home with the windows down, Rain watched Maxwell from the passenger seat. He looked relaxed, content, the man she fell for, the man who once said he wanted to build a life with her. Rain didn't know how fragile that peace would become later. She didn't yet see the distance forming beneath the surface. For now, she held on to the truth she knew. They had built something beautiful across two different worlds. And for a long stretch of their life together, those worlds met in harmony through Rain, Maxwell, and Mason. Rain's boutique grew faster than she ever imagined. What began as a dream in her small apartment had transformed into a flourishing business that attracted local attention. Word spread throughout Columbus about her bold designs, carefully crafted fabrics, and the individuality woven into each piece. Fashion lovers from nearby towns began making the drive just to own something from her collection. On a bright Friday morning, Rain unlocked the boutique doors and stepped inside, inhaling the familiar scent of new fabric. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, illuminating the dresses she'd arranged on mannequins the night before. Her phone buzzed with new orders, 3 from a fashion blogger's post, 2 from customers planning for an upcoming city gala. "This is real," she whispered to herself, smiling. She worked with gratitude and precision, adjusting displays, answering messages, sketching new ideas in her notebook. Every stitch felt like a promise she made to herself years ago, a promise to build something lasting. Maxwell had once insisted she could become the face of Ohio's fashion scene, and now that prediction didn't seem far-fetched. Across the city, Maxwell was experiencing a rise of his own. His tech company was expanding rapidly, gaining new contracts, hiring fresh talent, and attracting investors from outside the Midwest. Articles praised his innovation, and his board of directors applauded the company's upward momentum. At home, evenings became a cycle shaped by dedication. Rain often cooked while Mason played with building blocks on the kitchen floor. Maxwell would walk through the door just in time for dinner, loosening his tie as he kissed Rain's cheek before lifting Mason high into the air. Laughter filled the kitchen, followed by bedtime routines they performed almost effortlessly, baths, stories, and whispers of good night in the darkened hallway. These routines gave Rain comfort. They gave Mason stability. They gave Maxwell a sense of normalcy after long days in conference rooms. Rain worked late into the evening some nights, sketches spread across the dining table. Maxwell would sit beside her with his laptop, typing as she drew. They didn't always talk, but the quiet companionship warmed her. One night, she paused her sketching and looked at Maxwell. "You ever get tired?" she asked softly. He smirked without looking up. "Tired is my default setting." Rain nudged his arm. "Seriously, you've been pushing yourself hard." Maxwell finally met her eyes. "I'm trying to build something big, Rain. For us, for Mason." She nodded. "I know. Just make sure you're still taking care of yourself." His smile softened. "You're one to talk." They shared a quick laugh before returning to their work, unaware that the rhythm of their nights would soon shift. As the boutique gained traction, Rain began receiving invitations to local fashion events. One upscale venue in downtown Columbus requested she showcase her pieces for an autumn fundraiser. It was a big step, the kind of opportunity designers hoped for. When she told Maxwell, he reacted with surprising enthusiasm. "That's incredible," he said, pulling her into an embrace. "Send me the date. I'll make sure I'm there." Rain beamed. His support made everything sweeter. But not everything remained perfect. The first cracks in Maxwell's emotional balance appeared quietly, small moments that could be dismissed as stress if she wasn't paying close attention. One morning, as Rain prepared Mason's lunch, she noticed Maxwell sitting at the kitchen counter, staring into his coffee. His brow was furrowed, not in thought, but in something deeper. "You okay?" she asked. He blinked and forced a half smile. "Just numbers." Long week. Rain accepted it, but she couldn't ignore the distant look in his eyes. Later that week, she found Maxwell in his office at home, sitting in the dark. His laptop screen illuminated his face as he rubbed his temples. When she reached for his shoulder, he jumped slightly. "Sorry," he muttered. "Didn't hear you come in. You're working too much," she said gently. He exhaled sharply, frustration flashing for a moment. "That's how this business works. I can't slack off now." Rain stepped back. His tone wasn't angry, just tense, a tension that settled in the room like an invisible weight. She didn't want to argue, so she kissed his forehead and left him to his work. But she noticed something else that night. He didn't return to bed until long after she fell asleep. Still, life moved forward, and for a while, the happiness overshadowed the strain. Mason's joy bridged every gap. Whenever Maxwell walked through the door, his son's enthusiasm lifted his spirits instantly. "Daddy, look, I built a tower taller than me." Maxwell's face lit up. "That's amazing, buddy." Moments like those reminded Rain of the husband she first fell for, the man who embraced fatherhood with genuine tenderness. But in quieter moments, she saw a flicker of something new, restlessness, distraction, pressure he didn't voice. The subtle shift became clearer one evening when Rain returned from a boutique meeting. She found Maxwell sitting on the sofa with his head buried in his hands. "Max?" she asked softly. He straightened quickly, masking whatever weighted him. "Everything's fine. How was your meeting?" Rain studied him. His eyes didn't match his tone, but she didn't press. She didn't want to add to whatever he was carrying. "My meeting went great," she said instead, taking a seat beside him. "They want to feature my designs at the gala next spring." "That's great," he said, smiling faintly. But his smile faltered before it fully formed. Rain leaned her head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, but even in that closeness, she felt a space between them she couldn't name. That night, she fell asleep easily. Maxwell did not. He lay awake long after the room grew silent, staring at the ceiling as if searching for answers he couldn't reach. Rain had no idea how deeply those first cracks would widen, how stress, ambition, and hidden choices would reshape the man she married. For now, she still believed they were on steady ground. For now, the world remained calm. But beneath the surface, the shift had already begun. Maxwell's rise in the tech world had always seemed unstoppable. But as autumn settled over Columbus, a different rhythm took over his company, one that hummed with pressure instead of momentum. Inside the glass-walled headquarters, the atmosphere shifted from collaborative energy to thinly veiled tension. Deadlines grew tighter. Investors demanded faster results. A new project rollout faced unexpected setbacks, and Maxwell spent more hours at the office than he had in years. He arrived before sunrise. He left long after the cleaning crews finished. He skipped lunch meetings, rescheduled calls, and retreated deeper into his work. Employees who once admired his drive began whispering in hallways, exchanging uneasy glances whenever he walked past. His normally confident stride became rigid, his shoulders weighed down by something he refused to name. In conference rooms, subtle changes appeared. Maxwell snapped more quickly. He paced during meetings. He reread documents multiple times as if searching for invisible errors. Team members exchanged looks, not judgmental ones, but the cautious kind people reserved for someone unraveling inwardly. Craig Vanderholt, Maxwell's second-in-command and longtime colleague, noticed the shift almost immediately. Craig had worked beside Maxwell for years, watching him build the company from a small team into a thriving powerhouse. He knew Maxwell's strengths, strategic thinking, determined leadership, and his weaknesses, workaholism and internalizing everything. One afternoon, during a leadership meeting, Craig watched Maxwell stare blankly at a set of financial projections displayed on the screen. "Maxwell, you want to go over these numbers?" Craig prompted gently. Maxwell blinked as if pulled from a deep tunnel. Yeah. "Let's continue." But he didn't continue. He just nodded, rubbing the back of his neck as though the weight of the world rested there. The room fell silent. The team waited. Maxwell forced a tight smile and motioned for Craig to proceed. After the meeting, Craig approached him privately. "You okay?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Maxwell shrugged. "Just pressure. Nothing I can't handle." Craig didn't buy it. Something was off. Not just stress, but distraction. Maxwell's focus was fractured, his decision-making uneven. He postponed things he normally handled instantly. He forgot which clients he had spoken to that week. He reviewed files more than necessary, catching errors no one else mentioned. It wasn't just overwork. It was something deeper. But Craig respected boundaries, so he simply said, "If you need anything, I'm here." Maxwell nodded without meeting his eyes. Downstairs, the whispers grew whenever Maxwell's name entered a conversation. Some employees spoke in hushed tones about mistakes he made during presentations. Others murmured about sudden calls he took outside, pacing back and forth with irritation. Or something worse. "Did you hear him earlier?" One employee whispered in the break room. "He mixed up the project deadlines." "That's not like him," another replied. "Something's going on. I heard he's been working weekends too. Who does he even talk to on those late-night calls?" Their curiosity grew, spreading through the company like an uneasy hum. Meanwhile, Rain continued running her boutique, unaware of the growing storm in Maxwell's professional life. She noticed him coming home later and more drained, but she assumed the business was simply in a busy season. She had seen him work hard before, she just didn't know what or who was adding fuel to the chaos. Back at headquarters, another subtle but significant presence became more visible around Maxwell, Zara Montgomery. Zara had always been ambitious, sharp, and relentless in her pursuit of influence. As the marketing director, she interacted with Maxwell on several projects, but lately her involvement expanded in ways that didn't go unnoticed by the staff. She attended meetings she traditionally wasn't part of. She lingered outside Maxwell's office, waiting for private discussions. Her laughter echoed softly through the corridor whenever Maxwell happened to walk by. People noticed. People whispered. Zara carried herself with confidence, too much at times, leaning into Maxwell's orbit with practiced ease. She spoke with certainty in meetings, offering opinions with the kind of boldness that suggested she felt protected. One afternoon, Craig walked past Maxwell's office and saw the door halfway open. Zara stood inside, holding a stack of papers while Maxwell leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "You need to take a break," Zara said, her voice softer than usual. "You're pushing too hard." Maxwell let out a shallow exhale. "I don't really have a choice." Zara stepped closer, lowering her tone. "You always have a choice. Let someone else carry some of this." Craig paused outside, unseen, listening for a moment before stepping away. He didn't know what bothered him more, Maxwell confiding in Zara or the familiarity in Zara's tone. Later, during a department review, Craig noticed Zara speaking over senior managers, pushing ideas Maxwell usually questioned, but this time, he simply nodded along. That wasn't Maxwell. That wasn't the man Craig had built this company with. Something in Maxwell had shifted, his judgment, his boundaries, his balance. It wasn't loud or obvious to everyone, but Craig saw it clearly. On his way out of the meeting, Craig caught Maxwell alone. "You've been leaning a lot on Zara lately," Craig said carefully. Maxwell rolled his shoulders as if brushing off invisible tension. "She's handling projects well. She's efficient." Craig raised an eyebrow. "She's also overstepping." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "She's doing her job." Craig opened his mouth to respond, but Maxwell cut him off. "I'm fine, Craig." The finality in Maxwell's voice ended the conversation. As Craig walked away, he knew something wasn't fine, and whatever it was beginning to affect both Maxwell's leadership and the company's stability. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the headquarters lobby in soft gold. Employees packed up their desks, heading home to families in quiet evenings. Maxwell remained upstairs in his office long after everyone left, staring at spreadsheets that blurred together and emails he couldn't focus on. The glow from his monitor highlighted the strain on his face, the exhaustion etched around his eyes. His phone buzzed. A message from Zara. He hesitated, then opened it. Whatever was beginning between them wasn't clear yet, but the fracture had started, and soon it would spread far beyond the office walls. As September deepened, the evenings inside the Harrington home began to feel different. Not colder, not hostile, just marked by an absence Rain couldn't quite put into words. Maxwell still kissed her goodnight, still tucked Mason into bed, still carried himself with the outward confidence of a man in control. But something about the way he moved through the house had changed. He no longer lingered in the kitchen after dinner. He no longer sat beside her while she sketched new designs. He no longer hummed off-key while reviewing numbers. Instead, he drifted into his home office with his laptop under his arm, closing the door behind him with a softness that felt deliberate. Every night the house echoed with the same sound, the faint click of that office door, and each time Rain felt a small tug in her chest. One Thursday evening, after putting Mason to bed, she passed by Maxwell's office and noticed the light shining under the door. She paused, listening. Silence. She knocked gently. "Max?" She called. No answer. She tried again. "Do you need anything?" Still nothing. Rain swallowed her worry and returned to the living room, convincing herself he was simply concentrating deeply. She wrapped herself in a throw blanket and opened her sketchbook, but her pencil remained still on the page. Her thoughts drifted back to Maxwell's weary eyes at breakfast that morning, the half-hearted smile he'd given before rushing out the door, the way he brushed off her questions about his workload. She tried to draw, but every line felt heavy. Hours passed. The digital clock blinked 11:57 p.m. when she finally reached for her phone. She typed, "Hey love, you still working? Don't stay up too late." She hesitated before hitting send, worried she might sound needy or intrusive, but she pressed the button anyway. She waited and waited, but no reply came. It wasn't the first time. In recent weeks, Maxwell had become unreachable during late hours, his replies scattered or non-existent. These weren't deliberate acts of cruelty, not yet, but they built a quiet wall around him, a wall Rain increasingly sensed she wasn't allowed to climb. When midnight arrived, she checked the hallway again. His office door was still closed. The faint glow of his screen filtered through the crack at the bottom. She pulled her blanket tighter and whispered to herself, "He's just tired, just stressed. This is temporary." But deep down, an uneasiness was settling. The next morning, Rain debated whether to confront him, but Maxwell walked into the kitchen already dressed, bag slung over his shoulder, tie slightly crooked, a sign of hurried exhaustion. He kissed her cheek quickly. "Big day," he muttered. "I'll see you tonight." "Did you get my message last night?" she asked gently. Maxwell paused only half a second. "Oh, yeah, I fell asleep in the office. Sorry." The explanation didn't match the light under the door she saw for hours, but she chose not to push. Mason ran into the room, a burst of energy that broke the tension. "Daddy, look at my drawing." Maxwell scooped him up. "It's amazing, buddy. You're getting better every day." Rain watched them interact. Nothing in Maxwell's tone was harsh, nothing in his gestures was wrong, yet something fundamental was shifting beneath the surface, something she feared acknowledging. Later that afternoon, unable to shake her growing worry, Rain called Tanika and asked if she could stop by the boutique. Tanika arrived within 20 minutes, her expression already full of concern. "What's going on?" she asked as soon as she entered. Rain tried to wave it off. "I'm being dramatic." Tanika crossed her arms. "When you say that, you're usually not." Rain sighed and motioned for her to sit. She closed the boutique for an hour so they could talk privately. She sat across from her best friend, fingers intertwined, voice low. "It's Maxwell," she began. "He's been distant." "How distant?" Tanika asked. Rain hesitated. "He works late, really late. He's exhausted all the time. He doesn't talk about what's bothering him, and when I ask, he shuts it down." Tanika's expression tightened. "And how does that make you feel?" Rain let out a slow breath. "Like I'm losing him without even knowing how." Tanika reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're not imagining it. Something's off. The question is whether it's just stress or something else." Rain looked down at her hands. "I want to believe it's work. His company's expanding fast, but the way he avoids conversations, it scares me." Tanika studied her. "Have you asked him directly what's going on?" "I tried. He pushes it aside every time. And last night," Rain swallowed, "he didn't answer my text." Tanika's eyes softened. "Rain, you don't deserve to feel alone in your own marriage." Rain nodded slowly, tears forming at the corners of her eyes but not falling. "I miss him. He's here but not really. I don't want to assume anything bad, but something inside me feels unsettled." Tanika didn't sugarcoat anything. She never had. "Listen, I'm not saying jump to conclusions, but I am saying trust your intuition. If something feels wrong, don't bury that feeling." Rain closed her eyes briefly. I just wish he'd let me in. Tanika squeezed her hand again. You have every right to ask your husband to show up. You're not asking for too much. Their conversation was interrupted by the chime of Rain's phone. She glanced down instinctively. A message from a customer, not Maxwell. Her heart sank a little. Tanika noticed. He still hasn't reached out? Rain shook her head. Tanika sighed. Whatever this is, you won't face it alone. I'm here. Always. Rain nodded, grateful beyond words. She felt steadier with Tanika beside her, but the ache remained. That night, when Rain returned home, she found Maxwell again in his office. The light glowed under the door. The same glow she had seen the night before, and the night before that. She listened. Silence. She didn't knock this time. She didn't text. She simply stood outside the door, hand resting against the frame, breathing quietly. Inside that room, something was pulling Maxwell away from her, from their family, and even though she couldn't see it yet, she felt its presence. She whispered into the empty hallway, "Please don't drift any further." But the door stayed closed. The shift from emotional distance to something sharper happened slowly, then all at once. It began with whispers at Maxwell's office that grew bold enough to reach ears that shouldn't have heard them. The company had always been a place of professionalism, but lately, bits of conversation hid inside corners of the hallways. Murmurs that weren't just about deadlines or investors. You saw them leave the conference room together, right? I thought that meeting ended an hour earlier. Why is she always in his office now? It's unusual. She's the marketing director, not the CEO's right hand. Craig heard all of it. He didn't encourage it, but he didn't ignore it either. He had noticed Zara Montgomery's presence intensifying over the past few weeks. She hovered near Maxwell constantly, stepping into discussions she wasn't needed for, handing him documents that assistants normally delivered, and finding excuses to extend her conversations with him even when the topics should have been brief. At first, Craig chalked it up to ambition. Zara had always been driven, but ambition didn't usually come with this kind of familiarity. One morning, as Maxwell prepared for a high-stakes investor call, Craig entered his office to discuss a technical issue. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Zara leaning over Maxwell's desk, pointing at something on his laptop screen while standing closer than necessary. Maxwell didn't move away. Craig cleared his throat. We need to go over the revisions before the call. Zara straightened, but not before running her finger along the edge of Maxwell's laptop, a gesture that looked more personal than professional. I was just helping Maxwell review the presentation, she said smoothly. Craig kept his expression neutral. That presentation is handled by the analytics team. Zara smiled, not embarrassed, but unfazed. Well, I thought I'd offer additional insight. Maxwell cut in. It's fine, Craig. Zara's feedback was helpful. Craig didn't argue, but the moment planted a knot in his stomach. Outside the door, employees exchanged glances as Zara exited the room with a confident stride. Their whispers trailed behind her like a shadow. By the end of the week, the atmosphere grew even thicker. A team from Rain's boutique had been collaborating with Maxwell's company on a charity fashion initiative, something they had worked on together for years. It was a project Rain loved, blending tech funding with creative outreach for young designers. Rain had sent over her final designs, excited to see them showcased. But when the revised drafts came back, something was different. The edits felt aggressive. The original concepts altered beyond recognition. Harsh lines replaced her softer shapes, and pieces meant to honor community art suddenly carried none of her signature style. Rain frowned as she flipped through the edits. These don't look like mine, she murmured. Her boutique assistant nodded. We received them from Maxwell's office this morning. Rain's chest tightened. She knew Maxwell respected her work deeply. He would never push such drastic changes without consulting her. Her first instinct was to call Maxwell, but instead, she decided to send an email asking who had made the edits. Hours later, a reply came. Revisions approved by Zara Montgomery. See attached notes. Rain froze. Zara. Why was Zara approving edits to a charity line that didn't fall under her department? She opened the attached notes, and the explanation felt even worse. Zara had written confident critiques of Rain's work, suggesting stronger impact, better alignment with corporate branding, and modernizing outdated elements. Outdated. Rain stared at the word until it blurred. Maxwell had always been her biggest supporter. He praised her creativity everywhere he went. He encouraged her to chase bolder designs. Yet now someone else was speaking over her aesthetic. and Maxwell had allowed it. Rain's breath tightened. This wasn't just disrespect. It was intrusion. Meanwhile, at the company, gossip grew bolder. I heard they've been working late together. Did you see them in the parking lot last night? She touches his arm every time she talks to him. He doesn't seem to mind. Craig didn't participate in the gossip, but he felt every word slice a little deeper. He had been loyal to Maxwell for years. He didn't want to believe anything was happening. But the signs grew undeniable. He noticed Maxwell returning from meetings with an odd mix of tension and exhilaration. He noticed Maxwell defending Zara's decisions even when they frustrated other managers. He noticed messages popping up on Maxwell's phone that made him quickly turn it face down. One night, long after most employees had gone home, Craig passed Maxwell's office and heard laughter. A soft, private kind of laughter he hadn't heard from Maxwell in a long time. He paused outside the door. Through the frosted glass, two shadows moved. Zara's voice drifted through the crack under the door. "Maxwell, you need to stop worrying so much. Everything will work out." Maxwell sighed. "I'm trying. You're carrying too much," she said. "Let me help you." Her words held an intimacy that didn't belong between a married man and a colleague. Craig stepped back, a mixture of disappointment and dread settling in his chest. This wasn't office support. This was the beginning of something that could destroy everything Maxwell had built, not just at home but professionally. Inside the office, Maxwell leaned back in his chair, tension etched across his face. He knew what he was doing skirted the boundaries he once fiercely defended. Rain's face flashed in his mind, her smile, her unwavering belief in him, the life they built together. But then Zara stepped closer, not touching, not crossing the line fully, just close enough for him to feel the pull. Maxwell hesitated, fighting himself. His conscience whispered warnings, but the mix of stress, admiration, and escape was intoxicating. Zara made him feel understood in a way he couldn't explain or justify. He didn't push her away. And that was the moment everything shifted. The moment the fracture in his life widened into something dangerous. The moment the man Rain trusted began losing sight of the vows he made. The morning began like any other, with sunlight slipping through the curtains and the quiet hum of the neighborhood drifting into the Harrington home. Rain descended the staircase, still adjusting the sleeve of her robe, expecting to find her son watching cartoons or rummaging through the cereal cabinet. Instead, she stopped short at the sight of a thick folder placed neatly on the kitchen table. There was no note, no explanation, just a plain folder, one that did not belong to her. Something cold slid down Rain's spine. She approached slowly, her fingers trembling as she lifted the edge of the cover. Inside were glossy prints, each photograph more devastating than the last. Maxwell, Zara, together, not at the office, not in a meeting, but at a dimly lit restaurant in New York, his hand on her waist, her leaning into him with familiarity that stabbed Rain in the chest. Rain's breath hitched. She flipped to the next photo. Maxwell and Zara walking through a park, talking as if they had known each other far longer than Rain suspected. Another photo showed them stepping out of a car, Maxwell holding the door for Zara with an ease that once belonged to Rain alone. Her knees weakened. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too unbearable. She clutched the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her heart hammered wildly, each beat sending shards of disbelief through her. "No, this can't be real," she whispered. But the photos were real. The dates printed on the bottom corner were recent. Rain forced herself to turn to the final image, the one that ripped the air from her lungs. Maxwell leaning close to Zara, whispering something near her ear. Zara smiling in a way Rain recognized too well, the smile of someone being chosen. Rain's vision blurred. She pressed a hand over her mouth, trying to contain the sob rising inside her. She had suspected something was wrong. She felt Maxwell slipping away. But nothing prepared her for this. A floorboard creaked behind her. Maxwell entered the kitchen, adjusting his tie, completely unaware of the hurricane waiting for him. He was mid-sentence when he noticed her frozen posture. "Rain, you okay?" Rain turned toward him slowly, the folder clenched so tightly in her hands the edges bent inward. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maxwell frowned. "What do you mean?" Rain opened the folder and let the photographs spill across the table like shards of glass. Maxwell froze. Every trace of color drained from his face as he stared at the images. His throat bobbed. His eyes flickered from the photos to Rain, searching for something, anything, that might save him from the truth that lay exposed. Rain, it's not what it looks like, he said quickly, stepping forward. Rain's breath shook. What exactly is it then? Because it looks like my husband is dating someone else. Maxwell reached for her arm, but she stepped back sharply. Rain, listen to me. Don't, she snapped, her voice cracking. Don't stand there and lie to me. Maxwell dragged a hand down his face, his composure cracking. It was work. She was upset about a project. We met to discuss. Stop. Rain pointed at the photos. You don't whisper to a colleague like that. You don't hold a colleague like that. That angle is misleading. Misleading? Rain laughed bitterly. You're holding her like she belongs to you. Maxwell's jaw tightened. I made mistakes. I should have set boundaries. But nothing happened. Rain's eyes filled again. Do you expect me to believe that, after everything I've felt these last few months? Silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating, undeniable. Upstairs, the soft sound of Mason humming to himself drifted down the staircase. Unaware, innocent, Rain looked up toward the second floor, heart aching at the thought that her son had no idea his world had just cracked open. Maxwell followed her gaze. Rain, please, let's talk about this calmly. Calmly. The word cut her. She felt heat rising into her face, her breaths sharp and ragged. Calm, Rain whispered. Do you have any idea what these pictures did to me? Do you understand what it feels like to be blindsided like this? To wake up believing my marriage was worth fighting for, only to find proof that the man I love has been living a double life? Maxwell opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. I stood by you, Rain said, voice trembling. When you were exhausted, when the company demanded everything from you, when you shut me out, I stayed. I believed in you, and you gave your attention to someone else. Maxwell's expression twisted, guilt flickering across his features. Rain, I swear, it didn't go as far as you think. Rain shook her head slowly. It went far enough. She felt the weight of betrayal crush against her ribs. Tears spilled freely now, running down her cheeks in silent streams. Maxwell stepped toward her again, desperate. Rain, please. But she lifted a trembling hand. Don't come closer. He stopped. The kitchen fell silent except for the faint sound of Mason playing upstairs, a reminder that life outside this moment still existed, innocent, untouched, unaware. Rain wiped her cheeks, but the pain did not fade. It sat heavy inside her, a raw, twisting wound she couldn't disguise. Without another word, she gathered the photos back into the folder and placed it firmly on the counter. This conversation isn't over, she said. But right now, I need space. Maxwell watched her walk away, the woman he took for granted now carrying a pain he could not undo. And for the first time since his life began slipping off balance, the consequences stood in front of him, undeniable and terrifying. Upstairs, Mason laughed at something on his tablet, unaware that downstairs his parents' world had just detonated. Rain spent the rest of the day in a fog of disbelief. Her body carried her through simple motions, folding Mason's laundry, preparing lunch, straightening the living room, but her mind replayed the photographs in endless loops. Every image cut deeper, reopening wounds before they had a chance to close. She didn't cry again. She didn't scream. She simply moved with a quiet heaviness that bruised her from the inside out. Maxwell tried several times to approach her, but each attempt collapsed under the weight of truth. He followed her down the hallway, stood outside the bedroom door, hovered near her in the living room, but the distance she held was unmistakable. And he felt it, deeply. But instead of seeking healing, he retreated further into himself. His guilt hardened into defensiveness. His defensiveness morphed into frustration. And slowly, a dangerous thought formed in his mind. If Rain walked away, she might take Mason too. That fear, irrational, selfish, destructive, began turning gears inside him. By evening, Mason bounded into the kitchen wearing his superhero cape again, unaware of the storm hovering between his parents. Mommy, can we go to the park tomorrow? He asked cheerfully. Rain forced a smile. Of course, baby. Maxwell swallowed hard, watching them. Jealousy and fear twisted inside him. He didn't know how to fix what he'd broken, but he knew one thing. Rain was pulling away. And that terrified him more than he cared to admit. Rain noticed Maxwell taking sudden interest in picking Mason up from daycare, something he rarely had time for before. He insisted he wanted to be more involved, a phrase that should have warmed her but instead felt strangely rehearsed. One afternoon, she arrived at the daycare only to find Mason already gone. Maxwell picked him up early, the receptionist said. Rain's stomach tightened. Early? Why? He didn't say, just signed him out and left. Rain thanked her and drove home, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. She wasn't angry, not exactly, but uneasy. Everything Maxwell did lately carried a shadow behind it. When she walked through the door, Mason ran to her excitedly. "Mommy, Daddy took me for ice cream." Rain hugged him tightly. "That sounds fun, sweetheart." Maxwell stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, face unreadable. "I didn't think you'd mind," he said. Rain nodded, though discomfort lingered. "I don't mind, I just didn't know." "I'm his father," Maxwell replied. "I can spend time with him without scheduling it." There was an edge in his voice she hadn't heard before. She let it go. The wound between them was still raw. She didn't want to ignite another fight. But that was only the beginning. Rain received a call from the daycare in the middle of her boutique hours. The tone of the worker's voice sent chills through her immediately. "Rain, you need to come quickly. Mason had a fall." Her heart stopped. "Is he okay?" Rain asked, breath shaky. "He's with the nurse, but we think he needs to go to the hospital. He's asking for you." Rain didn't even lock the boutique door. She grabbed her bag and ran. When she arrived, Mason was sitting on the nurse's lap, tears streaming down his cheeks, holding his arm tenderly. "Mommy," he cried. Rain gathered him instantly. "Baby, I'm here. I'm right here. What happened?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "He tripped in the play area," the nurse explained. He landed on his arm. "We think it's just a sprain, but it's better to let the hospital check." "I'm taking him right now," Rain said, already heading toward the exit. She didn't notice the daycare worker watching her, not out of concern, but calculation. Rain cradled Mason while nurses examined him. He whimpered, tears clinging to his lashes, and Rain kissed his forehead repeatedly. "It's okay, baby. You're safe. I've got you," she murmured. The doctor confirmed it was only a mild sprain. Relief flooded through her, so intense her knees nearly buckled. But something unsettling happened. While filling out paperwork, Rain noticed a nurse whispering to another team member while glancing her way. Rain assumed it had nothing to do with her. The ER was always busy, always chaotic. She didn't know this was the first step in a trap already set. Later that evening, Rain returned home with Mason wrapped in her arms. Maxwell arrived shortly after, stepping into the house with a look of shock. "What happened?" he demanded. Rain explained everything: the fall, the hospital, the sprain. Maxwell's jaw clenched tighter with every word. "You should have called me," he said. "I was focused on Mason." "You should have called," he repeated sharply. Rain blinked at the sudden harshness. "Maxwell, he was hurt. I did what any parent would do." He didn't respond. He simply turned away, breathing heavily. His reaction unsettled her again, but she dismissed it as fear. Maybe he was just shaken, maybe. But the truth was far darker. Maxwell had already begun crafting a narrative, one where Rain appeared overwhelmed and negligent. He had set the foundation when he picked Mason up without notice. He had positioned himself as the stable parent, and now, with an accidental injury on record, he saw an opportunity, a cruel one. Rain was preparing breakfast when a firm knock sounded at the door. She wiped her hands on a towel, expecting a package delivery. Instead, 2 uniformed officers stood on her porch. "Mrs. Harrington?" The first one said. Rain's stomach dropped. "Yes, we received a report concerning your son." Rain's heart hammered. "A report? About what?" "Possible neglect," the officer replied. Rain froze. "That's not true. We need you to come with us for questioning." Rain shook her head in disbelief. "My son had an accident at daycare. I took him to the hospital. There was no neglect. We were informed you appeared impaired at the time." Rain's eyes widened. "What? That's impossible. We need to follow procedure," the officer said. Behind them, Maxwell appeared at the end of the driveway, hands in his pockets, expression carefully composed, not surprised, but expectant. Rain stared at him, mind reeling. "Maxwell," she whispered. "What did you do?" He didn't answer. Her world tilted, the betrayal deepening far beyond photographs. This wasn't just infidelity. This was calculated destruction. And before she could even gather her breath, one officer gently took her by the wrist while the other stepped inside to speak to Mason, who peeked from the hallway with wide, frightened eyes. "Mommy," he whimpered. Rain's heart shattered. "I'll be right back, baby," she called, voice cracking. "Mommy's okay." But nothing was okay. Maxwell had begun the battle for custody, and Rain never saw it coming. The cold metal chair scraped softly against the floor as Rain shifted, gripping the edge of the table in an attempt to steady her breath. The interrogation room felt impossibly small, a single flickering light overhead, pale gray walls, and the weight of accusation pressing against her chest like a physical force. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, not as a suspect, not as a mother being questioned about her child. A thin folder sat on the table between her and the officer. He leafed through papers while Rain stared at her trembling hands, trying to remind herself she hadn't done anything wrong. The officer finally looked up. "Mrs. Harrington, we received a report that you were under the influence while caring for your son during the daycare incident." Rain's head snapped up, disbelief flooding through her. "That's a lie." The officer nodded calmly, not judging, not agreeing, just observing. "We are required to investigate all claims." "I wasn't impaired," Rain insisted. "I rushed straight from my boutique when they called. I took my son to the hospital. I did everything right." According to the report, the officer continued, "You appeared disoriented, slow to respond, unsteady on your feet." Rain stared at him, stunned. "I was panicked. My son was hurt. Anyone would seem shaken." The officer folded his hands. "Do you consume alcohol during work hours?" "No," she replied firmly. "Do you use any medication that could impair judgment?" "No." He leaned back slightly. "Is there any reason your husband would believe you were unfit to care for your child at that time?" Rain felt the floor drop beneath her. Her husband, the man who once lifted Mason onto his shoulders and whispered promises of forever in her ear. The same man who stood in the driveway and watched her be taken away without a single word. Rain swallowed hard. "My husband is angry with me. He's trying to punish me. For what reason?" Rain closed her eyes briefly, pain spreading across her face. "I discovered he's been unfaithful." The officer paused. Something shifted in his gaze, not sympathy, but awareness. Marriage conflict often sat beneath cases like these. "Mrs. Harrington," he said quietly, "if there is marital discord, it's important you tell us. It may help clarify why this report was filed." Rain's voice trembled. He's not the man I thought he was, but I would never harm my child, ever." The officer studied her carefully. "Do you know who else was present during the incident?" Rain shook her head. "I only know what the daycare told me." He slid a photo across the table, a still frame from the daycare's camera system. Rain's heart lurched as she saw the moment Mason fell. But something was off. There she was, blurry, distorted, positioned near Mason in a way that suggested proximity to the fall. But Rain had been across the room that day. She remembered clearly because she'd spoken to one of the teachers moments before. "This angle makes it look like I'm closer than I was," Rain said, hands tightening. "This isn't accurate." The officer nodded again. "We are aware camera angles can distort placement. Still, we need to consider all possibilities. Did you notice anyone acting oddly that day?" "No," Rain said softly. "It was a normal day. Except it wasn't. She just hadn't seen the trap forming." The officer closed the folder. "At this point, Mrs. Harrington, you are not under arrest. But given the report, we will need you to refrain from contact with your son until further review." Rain felt the air leave her lungs. "No," she whispered. "Please, no. He's my child. He needs me." "I understand the difficulty," the officer replied gently. "But this is temporary." Temporary, the kind of word people used when they didn't feel the consequences themselves. Rain's world blurred as she left the station. Her legs felt unsteady, her chest tight. She stumbled outside into the night air, gasping as though she had surfaced from deep water. Waiting for her near the curb was a familiar car, Maxwell's. He stepped out, face perfectly composed, expression unreadable. Rain froze. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice raw. Maxwell approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "I came to take you home." Rain backed up. "I don't want to go anywhere with you." But Maxwell didn't flinch. "Rain, this is getting out of control. You need help." Her eyes widened. "Help? You did this to me. You filed a false report." Maxwell's jaw clenched, but his voice remained calm. "I filed a concern. A father has the right to protect his child." Rain shook with fury. Protect him from what? A loving mother who rushed him to the hospital? A mother you betrayed? Maxwell inhaled deeply. Let's not mix personal issues with parenting. Rain stared at him in disbelief. You're unbelievable. I'm being responsible, he said coldly. You're under stress, you've been emotional, and now. If you finish that sentence, Rain whispered, stepping closer. If you dare imply I'm unstable, I will never forgive you. Maxwell stepped back, but only slightly. Rain, we need to make decisions based on Mason's best interest. She laughed, a broken, hollow sound. You dare speak about his best interest when you're destroying the only stability he has? Maxwell didn't respond. He didn't have to. Because a moment later, he pulled a document from inside his coat and handed it to her. Rain's blood ran cold. The header was unmistakable. Petition for divorce and full custody request. Rain stared, unable to breathe. The letters blurred through her tears. No, she whispered. No, Maxwell. Not like this. Maxwell lowered his gaze. I'm sorry it came to this. You're sorry? She said, voice cracking in anguish. You cheat on me. You sabotage my role as Mason's mother. You humiliate me, and I'm the one being discarded. Maxwell's silence confirmed everything. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional confusion. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was deliberate, strategic, cruel. Rain clutched the document against her chest, each word stabbing deeper. She felt her knees weaken, and for a moment, she thought she would collapse on the sidewalk. Everything she built, her marriage, her family, her identity, had been crushed under Maxwell's calculated lies. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Why are you doing this to me? Maxwell looked away. It's for the best. Rain shook her head violently. For who? For you? For your mistake? For your guilt? He didn't answer. And that silence, that cold, emotionless silence, shattered whatever remained of her trust. Not because she was strong, not because she knew what to do, but because she couldn't breathe standing near the man who had turned her life into a battlefield. She reached the edge of the parking lot before her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, hands pressed to the pavement, tears spilling freely. Cars passed in the distance. The wind brushed against her hair, but the world felt muted, like she was trapped underwater, sinking deeper. For the first time in her life, Rain felt truly alone. No husband, no son, no safety, no certainty. Only broken pieces of a life she once believed would last forever. And in that darkness, that crushing, suffocating darkness, she hit rock bottom. The cold from the concrete seeped through the thin fabric of Rain's jumpsuit as she curled against the corner of the holding cell. Time inside the gray walls moved strangely. Seconds. Stretched into minutes, minutes warped into hours. The small, barred window offered no comfort, only a strip of darkness that refused to shift. Rain sat stiffly on the cot, arms wrapped around the one thing that felt familiar in this nightmare, Mason's stuffed giraffe. She clutched it tightly against her chest, her fingers buried in the worn fabric, knuckles trembling. The scent of her son lingered faintly in the stitches, a mix of baby lotion and home, a reminder of the life waiting outside this suffocating room, a life someone was trying to steal from her. Her breath wavered as she shut her eyes. She replayed the moment the officers took her from the doorway of her home. She replayed Mason's terrified whisper, "Mommy," as a stranger's hand guided him back inside. The image struck her harder than any accusation the officers had spoken. She lowered her head, pressing her forehead to the soft plush of the giraffe. "Hold on for me, baby," she whispered. "Mommy's coming back to you." The cell clanged open and shut repeatedly as the night dragged on. Other detainees shifted, murmured, sighed, but Rain remained silent, unmoving. The ache in her chest pulsed like a clock, slow, relentless. This wasn't her life. This wasn't her story. This wasn't who she was. And yet Maxwell had placed her here. Her own husband, the father of her child, the man she defended even when he pulled away. A tear finally broke free, sliding down her cheek. She wiped it quickly. Crying felt dangerous, as if the moment she allowed herself to fall apart, she would never recover. She forced herself to breathe. Slow, steady, deep, the way her grandmother taught her during childhood storms. "You rise when the world knocks you down," her grandmother used to say. "You rise because you must." Rain repeated the words in her mind like a mantra, clinging to the truth hidden inside them. Around midnight, a guard approached her cell. "You have someone here for you." Rain startled, gripping the giraffe tighter. "Who?" But she didn't need the answer. She heard the footsteps, fast, emotional, purposeful. "Rain!" Tanika's voice trembled as she reached the bars, eyes already wet. "Oh my God, I'm here. I'm right here." Rain's knees buckled, but she stood tall, swallowing the sob that threatened to rise. Seeing her best friend, her anchor, nearly broke her. "Tanika," Rain whispered. Tanika reached through the bars, grasping her hands. "We're getting you out. Your family pooled together. The judge approved the release." The words hit Rain with the force of life returning to her lungs. "I didn't do anything," Rain said, voice cracking. "I know," Tanika replied fiercely. "And we're going to prove it." Minutes later, paperwork processed, signatures signed. Rain stepped out of the holding area with Mason's giraffe pressed against her chest, Tanika supporting her elbow as though she might collapse at any moment. The outside air greeted her with a rush of cold that made her gasp. The parking lot lights flickered above them, casting long shadows. But even the harsh glow of fluorescent lamps felt like freedom compared to the suffocating cell. Tanika led her to the car, opening the passenger door gently. "You sit, I'll drive." Rain nodded numbly, lowering herself into the seat. The giraffe never left her hands. As Tanika pulled onto the road, silence filled the car. Rain stared out the window, watching the blur of streetlights streak past. Every part of her body felt foreign, exhausted, hollow, trembling. But beneath the exhaustion, beneath the heartbreak, beneath the humiliation, something else began to stir. A quiet flame, small, fragile, but alive. "Tanika," she whispered. Tanika glanced over. "Yeah, he tried to take Mason from me." "Yes," Tanika said softly. "He did." Rain tightened her grip on the giraffe. "He lied to the police. He let them take me away. He filed for divorce. He filed for custody. He destroyed everything." Tanika swallowed hard. "I know, honey." Rain's breath hitched, but she didn't cry. "Not this time. I won't let him win." Tanika nodded slowly. "Good. I won't lose my son." Rain continued, her voice sharpening. "Maxwell thinks he broke me tonight, but he didn't. He woke me up." The quiet flame grew. "He wants a war?" Rain said. "Then he's going to get one, the right way, the legal way. The truth will speak." Tanika exhaled, relief softening her features. "That's the Rain I know." Rain leaned back, turning the giraffe over in her hands. Mason slept with it every night. He whispered stories to it. He hugged it during thunderstorms. She kissed its head gently. "For you," she whispered to herself. "Every fight, every step will be for you." When they reached Rain's family home, where her relatives waited anxiously on the porch, Rain stepped out with new resolve in her posture. They rushed to her, wrapping her in warm embraces, offering support, food, blankets, prayers. She held her head high. Maxwell had taken her to the lowest point a mother could experience. But he forgot one thing. Rock bottom is where the strongest foundations are built. Rain wasn't shattered. She was reforging. That night, as she lay in a quiet guest room beneath soft blankets, Mason's giraffe beside her, she let her eyes close with a newfound clarity. Tomorrow, she would begin gathering evidence. Tomorrow, she would begin reclaiming her life. Tomorrow, Maxwell would learn that the woman he tried to break was far stronger than he ever imagined. Rain did not sleep long, but when she opened her eyes the next morning in her family's guest room, something inside her had changed. The dread that suffocated her the previous night had receded, replaced by a hard, steady determination. The moment her feet touched the floor, she felt grounded. She felt present, and she felt ready. She showered, dressed, and stepped into the living room where her relatives sat waiting. They watched her with quiet concern, expecting tears or trembling hands. But Rain's eyes were clear. "I'm going to fight," she said simply. Her aunt exhaled with relief. Her cousin nodded. Tanika, seated at the end of the room, gave the firmest nod of all. "Let's get to work." And so they did. Rain began by meeting with the family attorney, a calm older woman who listened without interruption as Rain recounted the false report, the daycare accident, and Maxwell's sudden custody attack. "Maxwell is building a narrative," the attorney said. "We have to dismantle it piece by piece, show the truth." Rain nodded. "Where do we start?" "With the daycare, surveillance footage, teacher statements, Rain's phone records, hospital documentation, payment trail from Maxwell's accounts." There was more evidence than Maxwell realized, because he'd been sloppy. Guilt made people sloppy. The attorney asked Rain, "Do you remember anything unusual from that day?" Rain thought hard. Then her breath caught. "He picked Mason up early the day before. He never does that." The attorney leaned forward. "That's important." Piece by piece, they assembled the puzzle, one that exposed the truth Maxwell hoped would stay buried. The attorney obtained footage from the daycare's main hallway, not just the angle Maxwell used in his accusation. And this footage told a different story. Crystal clear, undeniable, devastating. Rain watched with trembling hands as the video revealed Maxwell holding Mason's arm too tightly, Maxwell tugging him in impatience, Maxwell losing his grip, causing Mason to stumble, Maxwell looking around before stepping out of frame. Rain pressed her hand to her mouth. "He hurt our son," she whispered through tears she refused to let fall. The attorney set her hand gently on Rain's shoulder. "This will change everything." 2 days later, Rain walked into the Franklin County Courthouse with her spine straight, her chin lifted, and Tanika gripping her hand like armor. Maxwell arrived moments later, dressed in a crisp suit, jaw tight, aura cold and confident. He assumed Rain was broken. He assumed today was just another step toward taking Mason away. But when he saw Rain's posture, no slump, no fear, something flickered in his eyes. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Rain felt her heart thump steadily in her chest. She didn't breathe deeply. She didn't need to. She simply existed in the moment, anchored by resolve. The attorney for Maxwell began with a practiced speech dripping in false concern. "Your Honor, my client is deeply troubled by Mrs. Harrington's unstable behavior and her inability to safely supervise their child." Rain didn't flinch. She watched him calmly, knowing truth stood behind her like a shield. When her attorney rose, the tone in the courtroom shifted. "Your Honor, the accusation against my client is not only false, it was orchestrated to manipulate custody proceedings. We intend to demonstrate, clearly and without ambiguity, that Mr. Harrington is misrepresenting the incident." Maxwell stiffened. The judge nodded. "Proceed." Rain's attorney approached with a remote in hand. "We will begin with the daycare footage submitted by Mr. Harrington." The screen lit up. The courtroom watched the clip Maxwell relied on, the misleading angle where Rain seemed close to Mason. Maxwell sat still, confident. Then her attorney said, "Now let's review the footage from the alternate camera." Maxwell's expression cracked. The second video began, clear, centered, and damning. The entire courtroom inhaled sharply as they watched Maxwell grip Mason's arm too forcefully. They saw Mason stumble. They saw Maxwell release him abruptly. They saw the truth, unfiltered, unedited, undeniable. A murmur spread through the room. The judge leaned forward. Maxwell's lawyer froze. Rain kept her eyes locked on Maxwell. She didn't smile. She didn't react. She simply stared as the truth laid itself bare. The judge turned to Maxwell. "Mr. Harrington, would you like to explain what we just saw?" Maxwell opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face twisted, panic flickering beneath his attempt at composure. "That footage," he stammered. "That's not... I wasn't... Were you not the adult holding the child?" The judge pressed. Maxwell swallowed hard. "Yes, but you reported your wife as negligent?" The judge continued sharply. Maxwell's silence was answer enough. Rain's attorney wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we also have hospital documentation indicating no signs of intoxication or impairment. We have statements from teachers contradicting Mr. Harrington's claims. And we have financial records indicating payments made to Zara Montgomery, the same colleague Mr. Harrington engaged in inappropriate conduct with." That last line echoed across the courtroom like thunder. Maxwell's composure shattered. "That's irrelevant," he snapped, rising from his chair. The judge banged the gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Harrington." His eyes darted wildly between Rain, the judge, and the attorney. Sweat gathered at his temples. His breath quickened, no longer controlled. The judge spoke firmly. "Based on the evidence, the accusations against Mrs. Harrington are dismissed. Furthermore, this court is deeply concerned that Mr. Harrington manipulated the situation for personal gain." Rain exhaled, slow, steady, a release of months of suffocating fear. The judge continued, voice firm. "Mrs. Harrington, custody is temporarily restored to you pending full evaluation. Mr. Harrington will have supervised visitation until further notice." Maxwell's jaw dropped. "Supervised? Your Honor, that's absurd." "What's absurd?" the judge countered. is weaponizing the system to punish your spouse. Rain didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She simply stood taller. For the first time since Maxwell began tearing her life apart, she felt power returning to her bones. As people began to file out of the courtroom, Maxwell stormed toward Rain. "This isn't over," he hissed, eyes burning. Rain looked at him. No anger, no fear, just clarity. "It is," she said softly. "You ended it when you chose lies." He flinched. She stepped closer, her voice steady as steel. "You can try to destroy me. You can lie. You can twist the truth. But I'm still standing, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." Maxwell inhaled sharply, chest rising with the kind of panic he could no longer hide. Because for the first time in months, Rain was the one in control, and he knew it. The courthouse steps felt different beneath Rain's feet as she walked out into the afternoon light. They no longer weighed her down. They lifted her, each step a reminder that she had survived a storm designed to break her. Tanika wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You didn't just win today," she whispered. "You reclaimed your life." Rain didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence carried strength now, not fear. She breathed deeply, the crisp Ohio air filling her lungs, grounding her. Maxwell stormed down the courthouse steps moments later, ignoring reporters, ignoring his lawyer, ignoring the world spinning out around him. His gaze locked on Rain, but she didn't look back. For the first time since their marriage began, Maxwell stood behind her. Not ahead, not beside, behind, a place he never imagined he'd fall to. By the end of that week, Maxwell's professional life began to unravel, slowly at first, then like dominoes crashing in every direction. Investors requested emergency meetings. The board demanded explanations for his absence. Employees whispered in fear rather than curiosity. Craig watched the unraveling with mixed emotions, sorrow for the company he helped build, disappointment in the leader Maxwell had become, and guilt for not confronting the truth earlier. But it was the whistleblower's arrival that ignited the wildfire. A senior executive, someone Maxwell had mistreated for years, leaked documents showing personal expenses disguised as business trips. The details were meticulous. Hotel rooms far from company events, private dinners charged to investors, purchases with Zara's signature hidden in transactions. The board exploded in outrage. Why wasn't this audited sooner? How long has this been happening? Do you understand the liability this creates? Maxwell's answers were frantic, unconvincing, and increasingly incoherent. Zara tried to reach him multiple times, calls, texts, late-night messages. But as the pressure mounted, Maxwell stopped responding. His panic eclipsed any relationship they believed they had. When she finally confronted him in person, the scene broke whatever illusion she once clung to. "Why didn't you warn me this was coming?" she demanded, stepping into his office without knocking. Maxwell didn't even look up. "I have bigger problems." "Bigger problems?" Zara snapped. "My name is on some of those trips. Do you realize what that means for me?" Maxwell's voice dropped into cold detachment. "I don't have time to fix your reputation, Zara." The words struck her like ice. She stared at him, this man who once clung to her presence, now refusing to acknowledge her fear. His downfall stripped him bare, revealing a truth she didn't want to accept. He was only loyal when it benefited him. Zara stepped back slowly, the reality settling over her. "We're done, Maxwell." He didn't respond. She turned and walked out, heels clicking hard against the floor, each step echoing the finality of the relationship he ruined his family for. Maxwell didn't chase her. He didn't even lift his head. Once internal documents leaked, outside authorities stepped in. Financial auditors, federal investigators, attorneys representing investors. Meetings dragged deep into the night. Maxwell could no longer hide behind charm or strategy. Both had evaporated. His signature projects were frozen. His leadership privileges suspended. His company credit cards disabled. By the following week, the board held a closed-door vote. Maxwell Harrington was removed as CEO. The decision shook the tech world. Newspapers flooded with headlines. "Billionaire CEO under scrutiny, internal misconduct allegations surface, former executive director leaks damaging evidence." But none of those words pierced Maxwell as deeply as the quiet knock on his office door that same afternoon. It was Craig. He stood with a mixture of sadness and finality. "They want you to pack your personal things today." Maxwell looked around the office, once his sanctuary, now a cage. "Craig, I didn't mean for any of this." Craig raised a hand. You hurt a lot of people, Max, including her, including your son. Maxwell's throat tightened, but no words came. Craig's disappointment cut deeper than the board's verdict. You had a good life, Craig said softly. A family, respect, a future. And you threw it all away. For the first time in months, Maxwell looked defeated. Not angry, not defensive. Just hollow. Craig sighed. I hope you fix yourself before there's nothing left. He walked out. This time, Maxwell was the one left behind. While Maxwell's empire collapsed, Rain's world breathed again. She returned home with Mason, legally, safely, fully. The moment she walked through the doorway carrying him in her arms, she felt the ache of the past month wash out of her body. Mason held her face gently. Mommy, are you happy now? Rain smiled with warmth she thought she had lost. More than you know, baby. Her boutique flourished even stronger than before. Community women rallied around her, celebrating her integrity and resilience. Former customers brought friends. Local media featured her story of perseverance, not the scandal, but her leadership in empowering women. Rain didn't use her pain for pity, she transformed it into purpose. She hosted workshops for mothers facing unfair custody battles. She organized clothing drives for shelters. She spoke at community centers about emotional resilience. Every room she entered, she filled with sincerity, strength, and a quiet glow that came from surviving fire without letting it burn her spirit. Bankruptcy announcements arrived within the month. Investors pulled out. Creditors demanded returns. Maxwell's properties were seized. His accounts were frozen. He lost his home. He lost his company. He lost his public standing. And worst of all, he lost the trust of the only family he ever had. Zara vanished from his life long before bankruptcy filings reached the news. She never answered his calls again. She never stepped into another room with him. And she certainly never looked back. Maxwell moved into a modest rental outside the city, a far cry from the mansion he once ruled. His reflections became his punishment. The silence of the tiny apartment clawed at him in ways public condemnation never could. He tried calling Rain once. She let the phone ring, not out of spite, but because she no longer needed any closure from him. Her life had already moved forward. Spring arrived again, bright and hopeful. Rain and Mason moved into a cozy home filled with sunlight, art, music, and freedom. Their neighborhood was quiet, safe, welcoming. Every morning, Mason sat at the table with a bowl of cereal, while Rain braided his hair, humming softly. Every afternoon, she picked him up from school and walked him home through streets lined with blooming trees. Every night they read stories together. Mason snuggled against her side, Giraffe always tucked under his arm. Their peace wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was gentle, earned, sacred, and Rain guarded it fiercely. Neighbors adored her. Community leaders admired her. Women she had helped often wrote letters thanking her for giving them courage. She didn't rebuild her life through revenge. She rebuilt it through grace. Months later, as Rain and Mason sat under the shade of a tree in their backyard, he looked up at her with innocent eyes. Mommy. Yes, baby. Are we safe now? Rain cupped his face, kissing his forehead. We are safe. We are strong. And we are free. He nodded, settling against her arm. As the breeze rustled the leaves, Rain reflected on the journey. She was destroyed. She was blamed. She was cast aside. She was framed. She was nearly defeated. But truth rose. Strength rose. Justice rose. She rose. And in that rise, Maxwell fell. Not because Rain wanted revenge, but because no empire built on lies can withstand truth. No relationship built on deceit can survive exposure. No powerful man can outrun accountability forever. Rain stood tall because she held on to integrity. Maxwell fell because he let go of his. And that, Rain realized, was the moral her story would carry forever. A woman who fights with truth may be knocked down, but she will always rise higher than the one who tried to break her. Rain watched Mason chase butterflies across the yard, laughter filling the air, pure, bright, unbroken. Her heart softened. Her new life had begun.